Okay, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gord, City Councillor for Parkdale High Park, Ward 4. Joining me today are Councillors Kristen Wong-Tam and Mike Layton. Councillor Paula Fletcher has also indicated she's in support of what we'll be announcing today, but was unable to join. If you are a member of the press, could I ask you to please identify yourself and the outlet with which you're affiliated through the chat, so that when we get to the question and answer portion, we can promote you to full video and audio privileges. And with that, I'll begin. The City of Toronto is currently facing a triple crisis. We have an outstanding housing crisis that goes back years. We have a pandemic crisis, and we have a crisis of a poison drug supply. The City of Toronto has responded to these in an astonishing way. We have been creating new housing units at twice the rate we ever have created them before. We've done remarkable work in partnership with the federal government to launch a rapid housing initiative. We've also done work to create harm reduction resources throughout our housing system. However, remarkable work has not been enough. We are still in a position where hundreds of people either live on our streets or are currently living in our shelter system. Those hundreds of people face the prospect of another year without housing unless we take immediate action. At the Planning and Housing Committee, we directed Toronto City staff to produce a report on emergency measures that could house people in a matter of weeks or months rather than years. We are still awaiting that report. Several of us on council have been having discussions about the nature of the emergency measures that we need to undertake, and we'll get into some of them. But among them is a critical one. The federal government, under their Emergency Act, have the authority to rapidly expropriate properties. Specifically, under Section 8.1c of their Emergency Act, they can expropriate properties in a matter of days. This gives us the possibility of making sure that everyone in the City of Toronto who needs a home has a home. As we move into the cold weather, increasingly people who are living in the streets or in encampments are at risk of dying from the cold or dying as a result of fires caused by their attempts to heat parts of the encampment. We've already had 2 fire outbreaks in encampments in the City of Toronto. It is essential that Toronto City Council consider this motion that we are going to be proposing when the report comes to council, that the federal government use those emergency powers to create housing right away. In many instances, City of Toronto staff have approached hotels and other places for people to live, and we've been able to successfully create units. However, we have not been able to create units fast enough because many hotel owners and owners of apartment buildings that are currently vacant have not accepted the city's offer to lease those units as emergency housing. Therefore, we will be moving when the planning and housing item comes to council, whether staff recommends it or not, that council call on the federal and provincial governments to use those emergency powers to expropriate the necessary units so that every individual in the City of Toronto who needs housing has housing. The issue is, of course, not as simple as that. Councillor Wong-Tam will be talking a little bit about some of the services that we need in support of that. We also have an outstanding request of the province of Ontario to bring in an eviction moratorium so that the homeless population in the City of Toronto does not grow. But an urgent and essential piece of the picture has to be calling on the federal government as the United Council to use their expropriation powers where necessary so that we can guarantee that in a matter of weeks we have the housing necessary for people living in the City of Toronto and who do not have housing. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councillor Wong-Tam for any remarks she cares to make.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perks, and thank you all of you for taking some time to join us for this press conference. This particular issue is one that has galvanized not just City Council, but I think it has actually taken up much time and space in living rooms, dining rooms, and boardrooms of Torontonians. But it cannot be ignored that the most people who are affected are those who don't live in any of those rooms. And those are the people who are living on the streets, who are chosen to reside in the parks for reasons of their own, but also largely because they don't feel safe in congregate settings. We have the Streets to Homes team. We have expanded the shelter system. There are daily efforts to try to get people indoors, and the City of Toronto has moved at a pace that I have not seen during my time at City Council. I have in the past leaned on City Council to do more to try to become providers of housing as well as providers of shelter. And I've also been very critical when City Council has fallen short. When we did not declare homelessness a crisis as we should have 3 years ago, we would have not perhaps be in the bind that we're in today. But I cannot say that City Council is no longer not doing enough. City Council has now, through the leadership of the city manager and the SSHA team, I've now seen them move at warp speed. They have now done everything they possibly can within all the powers that they have to deliver and expand shelter services, 24-hour respite services, alternative accommodations, including very expensive hotel shelters. All of that has been done in a very short period of time, and they have now reached this critical breaking point, which requires now a different effort. And the effort now that we require is to make sure that the federal and provincial governments step in quickly, as they have done in collaborative manner during the COVID crisis. And it is critically important to know that it's not just housing that many of these individuals need. They also need mental health wraparound supports. They need to have access to caseworkers. They need to have access to harm reduction services. They need to have social supports and substance use recovery programs, so therefore they can stay housed once we do get them indoors. And all of that is about building a continuum of care that allows us to provide housing with dignity, housing with the appropriate supports. And it is those operational maintenance dollars that we will also require from the provincial government and the federal government. Simply providing a roof is no longer enough, especially as we know there are very vulnerable people that have unique circumstances that require unique services and care. At this point in time, city staff have advised me that they will run out of certain dollars by March, simply because that's the extension of the program for some of the hotel rentals. We were given enough money to hold on until March, and it may not necessarily, and needs to be renewed. So hopefully it will be renewed. But what they've also advised myself and other city councillors is that they're taking the capital dollars that they have, which could be used for housing and shelter expansion, and they've now had to build in their own wraparound supports. So those are mental health supports, recovery supports, and social supports that were allocated to build and expand housing that they've now needed to spend in order to keep people housed because of the cycle of poverty and the precariousness of homelessness. Entirely, it is unsustainable. I am aware that we need to do more, but I'm also critically aware at this point in time that City Council has reached almost the end of their rope. And if we don't get the additional resources and the expropriation powers from the federal government to act on behalf of cities like Toronto, who are facing this housing crisis, we are going to be in deeper crisis by the end of the winter. And what it really means is the humanitarian crisis that we are facing will get worse. People will die. They will die in the fires of the encampment as they're desperately trying to stay warm. They will die because they will freeze to death. And all of this can be prevented, which is probably the most important point to make, is that we have not exhausted all powers at all orders of government. And this is our plea to the provincial and federal government to step in with purpose, with speed, to help us and end this homelessness crisis in Toronto. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Lake.
Yes, thank you very much. Look, the time to act is now. We can't wait for tomorrow. We all know what the consequences will be if people are sleeping out on the streets in the cold. While City Council continues to work to find additional hotels, and we haven't stopped, our city staff haven't stopped to provide these hotels for adequate sheltering during the cold months, but most importantly during this crisis, which is like other winter that we've seen in the city. Our efforts are not always successful. Despite trying and offers into hotels and to other landlords with vacant units, they don't always take the deal. Now they have, and the city's done great work to advance that, but it's not enough, and it hasn't been enough. We don't have the necessary tools to compel hotel operators with vacant rooms or owners of buildings with vacant apartments to lease to us. But the federal government does. Under the federal government's powers, we could activate those vacant rooms immediately and address these issues. Now, we know that the federal government has offered supports to the city, and for that we are grateful. But if we're not all using every tool in our toolbox, then we're doing a disservice to the residents that are most vulnerable in our city. We're begging the federal government to help us beyond what they're already doing to make sure we can give access to spaces that are safe for people experiencing homelessness. We need to access these hotel rooms now. If this isn't an emergency, then I'm not sure what is. And 7 out of 10 Canadians agree. A recent Nanos poll said that 7 out of 10 Canadians believe homelessness is an urgent issue that needs to be addressed. This problem, as Councillor Perks said, was decades in the making, and every level of government has some responsibility for that. But we're going to have to also use every bit of every government's power and every tool in each of their toolboxes in order to ensure that those experiencing homelessness this particular winter are given safe shelter. And in that case, it means not in congregate settings for many of those individuals. Now, I'm hopeful that the staff report and City Council will support the motion that will be put on the floor asking the federal government to undertake their expropriation powers. And I'm equally as hopeful that the federal government will hear our call and agree to take action, the necessary action, to address the emergency issue we're facing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final reminder, if you are a member of the media and would like to ask a question, please could you put in the chat the name of your name and the name of the media organization you're with, and we'll promote you so you have the ability to ask questions. A person from the Toronto Star has joined us. Victoria, do you have any questions?
I do. Thanks, Council. I'm going to stick with audio today because of some internet difficulties. But I'm wondering, with this request, does it reflect any difficulty acquiring the vacant properties through the federal rapid housing initiative process, or sort of a lack of faith in being able to successfully close those transactions, or conversely, a feeling that the program isn't moving fast enough?
So there are two elements here. The first element is that the City of Toronto has been approaching hotels particularly and asking them if they would lease rooms to us. We've been getting some yeses and some nos. And as a result, we don't have enough units to house everybody who is in need of housing right now. The second element is the Rapid Housing Initiative. While it's a great initiative, it's worth remembering that it will not bring units on for a year or possibly two, or in some cases even longer. And as anyone will tell you, asking people to live on the streets or in our shelter system for over a year has long-term health and mental health impacts that are unacceptable to myself and my colleagues. We need the federal emergency powers for expropriation so we can close that time gap as well.
Thanks for that. And you're saying that the owners of these properties haven't accepted city offers. Some of these city offers to lease units. Can you specific cases where that's happened?
My hope is that the city staff report, which we're due to get at this council meeting, might make that more clear. At present, I'm not in a position to name names. And I can tell you, though, on top of that, beyond that, I'm aware of a residential building in my ward that's an apartment building that has over 150 units that are vacant right now, 103, 105 West Lodge. I don't know if the city has approached them, but it's just an example of the extent to which there are habitable units available right now that could be put into our housing system if the federal government were to partner with us and make available their powers under the Emergency Act.
Yeah. Victoria, it's Kristen speaking. Further to what the councillors just said, staff have also advised me that sometimes they cannot even make contact with the property owners. So for example, if it's a numbered company or someone who's just refusing to reply, they don't even have someone to negotiate with. They can't even submit an offer. So there's literally a missed opportunity there just because there isn't one on the other end of the phone. The other thing, coming back to your first point, is that there are limitations to the Rapid Housing Initiative Plan. And because it's administered through through CMHC, they can also disqualify some properties that the city has submitted for consideration. And I know that has come back to us. Properties that the staff have said they wanted to pursue, and for reasons provided to them, they've been declined.
Thanks for that. I have a couple more questions, but if there's anyone else on the line, I'll let my colleagues go first.
It seems that your colleagues are prepared to just listen. So Victoria, you go ahead.
Terrific. Well, I'm curious what you think about the possibility. I know there was a report expected this fall about potentially vacant Airbnb units. My knowledge still hasn't been delivered unless I've missed it. Is that something that you'd also like to see considered in sort of the same vein?
So that's a possibility. The point is that there are many possibilities here. I know that city staff, as we were preparing our temporary rental unit bylaw, did do something of a market survey and are probably aware of Airbnb units held where there are multiple units and that are not inside a principal residence. That would be another example. The point is that city staff should be given the power, every tool necessary, whether it's for hotel units, apartment units, or vacant Airbnb units, to put those make those units available to people currently are without homes.
I think if I could add, that proposal, while like an interesting opportunity, will run up against the same problems that we're currently experiencing. Now we could negotiate individually with 1,000 Airbnb owners, but think about how complex that negotiation would be, because we're not dealing with one entity or even a handful of entities. We're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of entities, and they're not compelled to make a deal with us. Just like right now, as city staff goes out and approaches landlords of large properties in order for us to achieve the numbers that we need, and we're talking in the hundreds and the thousands of units that we're going to need in the short term, it's just not realistic to think that we'll be able to get enough willing parties and negotiate enough leases in order for us to address the need that's out there, because the city has been trying. So it doesn't address the immediate need that the request of the federal government to start enacting expropriation of certain properties that may help us meet that need. That it wouldn't move as quickly the federal government using this tool.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Seeing none, Mike and Kristen and I have a very short window before we have to return to council, so we're going to go off and do that work. Thank you everyone for attending. We're available during the day if you have follow-up questions. Bye now.